by the 1960s has said he'd overestimated the necessity for a market. And computer technology now meant that you didn't need anything like as much of a market as he'd thought in the 1930s. So let's look at the computer technology available in those days. This is a machine called the Besem 1. It was invented by a Soviet engineer called Lebedev and was used by Kantorovich in the 1950s to do factory scale optimization. It's very, very low power by modern standards. It's got 1,024 words of memory, okay, which is about a millionth of what one of these laptops has got. But it was enough for him to do factory scale optimizations. He couldn't do the whole economy. If you look at the Soviet economy in the 50s, there were, in the 1930s, they only had a few hundred products covered by a technique known as material balances, which basically said you find out how much coal is being used in every section of the economy, how much coal is being produced by the coal mines of the Donbass, etc., and you try and bring these into alignment. And if you find that we're trying to produce more steel than is possible with the amount of coal being produced, we'll cut down the amount of steel we say we're going to produce. Or, more likely, they'll say, we'll raise the planned targets for the coal industry to produce more coal. But they could only handle by hand a few hundred products, which meant that only the key industrial products were covered by the plan. By the 1950s, this had risen to 2,000 industries and 10,000 products that were planned. But that's still way below the number of distinct products that were in the economy. There were 40,000 factories in the Soviet Union in the 50s being planned. The problem was that at that time, Kantorovich's method could only work with the then computers for about 100 products. You couldn't plan the whole Soviet economy with the technology they had at the day. Therefore, the planning system still had to work using pencil and paper or even abacus methods. It just wasn't possible to do it any better. By the 1960s, they had the Besem 6, and that did 1 million operations a second. It was roughly comparable to the equipment that was being produced in Britain in about 1960 or America about 1960. They were by this stage lagging behind the West. The Besem 1 was comparable to what was available in the West. By the 1960s, they were lagging behind. I've met people who've used these Besem 6s who said they were marvelous machines and seemed very fast. And they used them, for example, for calculating the trajectories of the Soviet landers on the moon, the robot landers on the moon. In principle, if they use this for planning, they could have planned around 1,000 distinct industries. The other main computer designer in the Soviet Union at the time was a guy called Glushkov in Ukraine. And he worked on small computers. And he put forward, basically, in the start of the 1960s, he proposed developing the internet, what we would now call the internet. If Khrushchev's goal of achieving communism by 1980 is to be achieved, what you have to do is get rid of money, and to do that, we need a complete computer network across the entire Soviet Union. We need public computers in every library, where every citizen can go in and see how the economy is working, and everything has to be run by a network of mini computers. And he was asked by Kosygin, okay, how long will it take to do this? He said, about 20 years. How much will it cost? He said, 5 times the combined cost of the space program and the H-bomb program. Which, if you think of what it has cost Western society to develop the internet, is probably not an unreasonable estimate. Kosygin said, oh no, that's far too long-term and expensive, we won't do that. Now, if you look at what the best of the the communist ruled countries can do now, on the other hand. The most powerful computer in 2013 is a Chinese machine called the TH2, and that is roughly 10 billion times more powerful than the best machine the Soviets had. It could compute a balanced plan for the whole of China in a fraction of a second. The calculations required are now entirely tractable. They weren't tractable to the Soviet Union with the computer technologies they had. The Chinese now have the technology, they could do it.